Hello, welcome, and in our series on early modern philosophy, today we are talking about Locke and personal identity. Locke does not only have a theory of ideas, of the mind, a theory of language, we talked about all these things before, but he also has a theory of personal identity. He also has a theory of social contract. Look at very diverse interests and very different things he's talking about. So now let's have a look at his theory of personal identity. And the question is here, what makes you the same person that you were yesterday, and what makes you the same person you were 15 years ago? If you're tempted to say something like, my consciousness has always been the same throughout this time, this is just not true. Your consciousness gets interrupted every night. When you fall asleep, your consciousness is gone. So the next morning you wake up. How do you know that the same person wakes up who fell asleep the night before? Your opinions change all the time. Most people start, wild and revolutionary in their young years and end up conservative and boring in their old age. So our plans, our preferences change all the time. Almost all other attributes, if you think of your education, your height, your weight, even your gender can change over time, right? And so we are essentially like Descartes' works. And if you don't remember this, go back and watch the video. We have a lecture on this where he says, I have this piece of wax and I'm always, changing it and warming it up and cooling it down, and all its properties change. So how do I know it's still the same piece of wax? And the same applies to human beings, right? We are always changing. How do we know we are still the same human beings? And essentially, what makes you be you? And this is a very important question, of course. Generally, we are interested in knowing what makes us be the persons we are, but it's also of particular importance for Christians, because the whole, moral point of Christian religion is to say, you have this life here in which you are supposed to do what God wants of you, and if you do it well, then you will be rewarded in the afterlife. If you do it badly, you will be punished. But then I can ask, okay, who is going to be punished? If my personal identity is not constant, how do I know that the one person who will be punished is the same person who now acts? Perhaps, if I fall asleep every night and my identity changes, then somebody else will be punished at the end of my life. Or when I die, perhaps some transformation happens. My soul is not anymore what I am now. And so how do I know that this punishment will be given justly? And if God is just, he must make sure that we do have a personal identity. So this is something that Christian thinkers engaged with for this reason, right? Where they had to sort out that we actually have a personal identity. Otherwise, the concept of sin and of punishment and redemption and so on, and going to hell or going to the this intermediate place, right, the purgatorium, where I get my sins get removed over time, and so then finally I'm ripe to go to paradise. This wouldn't make any sense if there was no personal identity, right? And Locke was one of the first philosophers who dealt with this problem philosophically, and he says there is obviously no particular substance, right? And he gets this from Descartes, the idea there is no particular substance that stays the same over time. Like the wax in Descartes' example, our person changes so much that we cannot say that this is anything that remains constant. So what is it that remains constant? The only thing that we can identify that remains largely constant is our consciousness. So Locke says, I will read you this, a person is a thinking, intelligent being that has reason and reflection and can consider itself as itself, the same thinking thing in different times and places, which it does not only by that consciousness, which is inseparable from thinking, and, as it seems to me, essential to it. So we share a consciousness with our past selves, and we have a memory of that consciousness. If you remember yourself of 2 years ago, this is different, feels different than if you remember a classmate of yours from 2 years ago, right? So you have this first person view of consciousness, you can see yourself from the inside, and this is special. This is something that you don't have about other people, this first person point of view. Between then and now, there is no fundamental change or break in perspective. There is, for example, a nightly break in consciousness, but the perspective remains the same. So when you wake up in the morning, you have all your memories from the previous day. You wake up in the place that you expect to wake up in because you remember the place you fell asleep in. So in reality, your memories, assuming the sleep does not give you any memories, if you don't have any vivid dreams over the long term, then your memories are continuous. And so Locke says the same thinking substance is neither necessary nor sufficient for personal identity. And this is not surprising, right? Because Locke doesn't even believe in substances. Locke says that the whole concept of substance is bogus because we can only have ideas of things that, the sensory perception has entered our minds through a simple idea, and nobody has an idea of substance, right? And therefore we cannot even point to anything that is a substance in our perception, in our experience of the outside world. And therefore the word substance doesn't even make any sense because we can only use words that correspond to things that we have experienced through our senses. So this is why Descartes' solution, Descartes says it's my substance, this stays the same, like the substance of the wax. But this does not make any sense for Locke, right? So Locke cannot say this, he has to find some other way, and this is the continuation of this consciousness. So when we think about humans as continuing beings over time, we have three different aspects of a human being to look at. We have first man, biologically human beings. Then we have persons, and it's possible that the person continues in different human beings, which is actually what happens, right? I mean, you are not the same human being you were at 5, but you are the same person you were at 5, right? So the human being physically has changed, the biological being has been exchanged over time, but you are the same person, right? So you have persons, you have human beings as biological organisms, and then in a Christian context you also have souls. And now you have to see how are these things related to each other. And so the same person can be in different bodies, which is what happens throughout our life, right? But it also could happen through reincarnation, if you believe in that, right? So a Buddhist would perhaps say that the same soul can go into different bodies over time through this process of reincarnation. And so for a Christian view, it's important to say that the soul exists now independently of the body, right? You don't want your soul to die when your body is dead, because then the whole of the Christian conception of the afterlife will fall apart. So you have the soul, and the soul persists even if the body ends. And you want the soul to also be connected to the person, because the person is the one who is good or bad and has to be rewarded or has to be punished. So the soul and the person should be connected in a way that cannot be separated, while the person and the body have to be separated, because the soul has to live on after the body dies. And at the end of time, according to Christian teaching, the souls which still exist at the end of time will be reunited with their bodies, which is the reason why we bury the dead in Christianity, instead of burning them or instead of destroying the body in other ways. They are buried with the thought, the motivation behind it, that the body stays in existence and later we will be reunited with this body. I mean, of course, this is not really what happens, because the body will decompose, or whether you burn it or it's eaten by worms is not really a big difference. But it seems that this is something that ancient cultures generally had, the idea that if we preserve the body, we preserve the soul, which is the basic motivation behind the mummification of pharaohs, for example, in Egypt, right, which is a much older, still 2,000 years older phenomenon. And there the idea was that preserving the body of the pharaoh makes it possible for him to exist in the afterlife, while if the body was destroyed, then somehow the soul would be lost. So this is a remnant of that, right, that still exists in the Christian religion. But now Locke does not like the concept of soul. Locke wants to get rid of the concept of a soul. And why does he want to get rid of it? Because the soul is an empty concept for him, because he says, as I said just now, that every word, in order to make sense, and we have a separate video about this, the previous one, if you want to have a look, he says every word, in order to have a meaning, must correspond to some simple idea. Simple ideas come from the senses, and there is no sensory input I can get from a soul. Nobody can see or smell or touch a soul. So if there is no sense that tells me about souls, then there is no experience, there is no idea of a soul that I can reference. And so the word for soul, if it doesn't correspond to any idea, it's meaningless. And so we should not be talking about souls. This is why he does not want to talk about souls, right? But we do have ideas of reflection of our past selves. So my memory of myself in the past is not in the same way a bad idea like, or a bad word or a meaningless word like a soul. My experience of my past is real, and I have ideas from reflection that correspond to this memory of the past. And so if I build my personal identity upon this idea of the memory of the past, then this would work. So in order to illustrate his idea of personal identity, Locke talks about the prince and the beggar example. He says if we took the memories of a prince and a beggar and exchanged them, and they stayed in the same body, but now they had exchanged memories of themselves, they had exchanged mental content, then this would make the beggar into a prince. He says the beggar would be thinking princely thoughts. Why would be thinking princely thoughts? Because his mental content, his ideas, his memories would be those of the prince. And so it does not matter in which body you are stuck. The prince's body would be thinking beggarly thoughts. So the body is not what matters. What matters is the mental content. And it's also not some kind of abstract soul. It is really the memories. It is all the past experiences that you had, all the ideas of reflection, the ideas of perception that come into you. This is what forms your personal identity. And there is a problem that is just a last remark that is a little bit funny. The Christian idea that the soul somehow connects with the body, and when the body dies, the soul still has some connection with the body, and later when we are resurrected, at the second coming of the Lord, then we will be reunited with our bodies. This actually has a few funny consequences. If you think, for example, of cannibals. A cannibal eats, let's say, a piece of a missionary, kills him and eats a bit of him. And now this piece of the missionary is going to become part of the cannibal's body. The proteins, right? The cannibal's body is going to digest the piece of the missionary, and now the cannibal contains a piece of the missionary as part of his own body. Now the rest of the missionary that's not so tasty he throws away, and now at the time of judgment, who can claim this piece of the missionary's body as his own body when they are resurrected and restored to their bodies? Will God solve the problem by just creating 2 copies of this missionary's arm that the cannibal has eaten, then each one gets some part of it? Or will the missionary's body for eternity now be lacking an arm because this belongs to the cannibal? Or will the cannibal's body be incomplete because the piece that was integrated into him from the flesh of the missionary is not actually his, and he has to somehow give it back at the second coming? So this is just an example people came up with to show how implausible this is, that the physical body needs to continue and is necessary for the continuation of the soul in eternity. And of course there are many other problems with this, right? The question is, which body will you get resurrected into? The one that you had when you were 20, or the one that you had, like me, when you were 60? This is also a very important question, right? I wouldn't like to be resurrected for eternity in my 60-year-old body, but we could discuss about my 20-year-old body, right? So this is all very difficult to sort out. And we have actually I have another series of videos about the philosophy of religion, where we talk about these things. And you're welcome to go to my daily philosophy channel, daily-philosophy.com. I will put a link here. And there we discuss these things. And there's also a daily philosophy channel on YouTube, which is also me making a little more produced videos, not lectures. And there we also talk about these things. So if you're interested in that, go and have a look. Okay, so thank you for being here. This was Locke on personal identity, and next time we will change the philosopher. We're finished with Locke. We will start talking about Berkeley. Thank you, and see you next time.